Okay, let's see how this goes. So, since I stumbled upon the topic of language learning, I thought that, maybe I could make a video about specifically about that and how I study languages, um, and how I've been doing it since I mentioned August last year. So when I started learning German, I decided first to learn, like I found some list, I think of like 100 most common or most useful words, and so I tried to memorize those, and then I sort of just went into Google Translate, and Google Translate can be terrible sometimes, but sometimes when it comes to simple words, it works. So I sort of just translated a bunch of very basic words into German. Then I sort of wrote them down on a paper and practiced those. And then I found this podcast called Easy German. And then when I started listening, I was surprised by how much could already understand because I sort of decided to focus on those most common words. And so that gave me a pretty big boost in motivation. And so I continued on listening to it, even though I didn't understand like most. I just understood quite a little bit, but I guess I got excited about the thought that I could, you know, improve and that I would start understanding more and more for every episode, and I did. So nowadays I can understand almost everything. But that initial boost in motivation was important. So I heard some people say that you shouldn't focus on the most common or most useful words, but I don't know why, because to me that seems to be important. If you can master the sort of most important words in the different categories, whether it's nouns or verbs or adjectives, those that are used in most, everyday speech, then you will feel like you have a very good starting point when it comes to learning the rest, because you will be able to pick up on a very large percentage of what you hear or read very early on. And I think the motivation is, of course, really the most important part, because without any motivation, you won't want to continue on learning. So I would say that was a good strategy when it came to German. And then I actually found this, and there was a list, I think, of the 10,000 most common words in written German. And so I've been print screening like entire pages of that and looked into those words. If there's some word I don't know, I look it up, really trying to focus on the most common words, the most useful words first and foremost. So there are lists like that. Um, I found some for French at least. I don't think I've found one for Italian, though it should probably be pretty easy to Google. So I would recommend, if you do find, you could search for like the 100 most common words, and some of those lists I found haven't been like, I've looked at them and been like, okay, this is not legitimate. These are not the most common words, but sometimes you find them and then you get like the pronouns, the articles, and you know the basic words. The verbs like to be, to have, to do. Those are of course the most important ones. And most of the time, I would say, if you don't understand a word, the Google Translate can help you, but it can also go really wrong, especially if you're translating from between two languages that aren't English, because it apparently translates everything through English, and I've noticed that, and that's really annoying because it can completely butcher the meaning. Um, but so yeah, and then I'm not getting sponsored by Easy Languages or anything, but I have been listening to Easy German since like August, and been noticing how my understanding has been improving like week for week almost. And so I've been able to understand more and more, and it's given me something to think about as well. That isn't just language learning because they discuss different topics, sometimes, cultural issues, sometimes, more or less interesting topics for me personally, but they give me something to think about. And so I would say pretty early on, I haven't been thinking about every single individual word, but more the general like topics that are being discussed, and trying to understand that if there's a word that is really important in the context that I don't know, then I can look up that specific word. But of course, often you can sort of get the idea without knowing every single word, and you know it can be entertaining to listen, especially if you find some program or um, a podcast about something you find interesting. So another thing I've been doing is I've been looking at news, for instance, German news, because I think I want to sort of know what's going on and things like that. And so if I can sort of combine two interests into one, then that's good. And sometimes I read Wikipedia articles about things in a different language, and I know that with me being autistic and everything, if I'm really, really interested in something, then I will try to figure out, like, what does this mean? How do I understand this? So it's like if I read the text in a different language that I find really interesting, then it's like I would try to reason, like, what does this mean? And if I don't know, then I will, you know, run away to Google Translate to try to figure out what a word means, just so that I can understand the information because I'm so interested in the subject. So I would definitely recommend sort of smashing interests together and reading or listening to something you find interesting in your target language. Then you will feel motivated to learn all the words that you need in order to understand, you know, what's been said, and also you acquire new knowledge about other topics at the same time. So it's like your yours can you can be studying two different things and learning about a completely different topic while you're learning a language at the same time. And then there are a couple of apps called Seedlang. Um, they have a German app, a French, and a Spanish one. And what they do is they have all these words and the translations, and it's essentially a game where you have to guess, like they will say the word in English, and then you have to write in what the word is in the other language, and you get sort of points for every time you um, write the word correctly. So it makes it into a game, and I think that can boost motivation if because of course if you I mean, games are often motivating to people. Scores, knowing that you scored something, it sort of it makes you feel like you've accomplished something. So if you want that, I can recommend See the Line. I'm not being sponsored for saying that, um, but yeah, I think it. Another thing that helps is that German is not grammatically, but when it comes to vocabulary, it's very much like Swedish, very similar. Um, Sometimes basically identical. So I already have a good ground. I could already guess some of it on my own. So I didn't start from zero. And I think the same is true for Latin languages, but more so with English because they have more in common with English because of all the loan words that English has from French and Latin and whatnot. So if you know English, you should be able to learn like Spanish and other Latin languages and a lot of vocabulary really easily because of the similarities there. So I've sort of been focusing on languages where I already have um, a better shot at sort of understanding because we have so many words in common. Um, I'm noticing that Greek is kind of very different. I mean, I would say the Germanic languages are more similar to the Latin languages than the Latin and Greek languages are to each other. That's my conclusion. But of course, I don't know a lot of Greek. I just looked at some of the basic words, and a lot of them seem very like alien. And it seems like it, I mean, you can barely notice that, for instance, Swedish is related to Greek, even though it is. So another thing that I was doing, and this isn't exactly, I mean, it's a part of language learning, but it's not strictly language learning. So I've been deciding to learn the Greek alphabet, and so this is what I did. I wrote down the different letters. So I got, for instance, oh yeah, I've got the different letters here, and I've made them different colors. For some reason, it seems to work better. I'm better at learning when I color things into different colors. So I've chosen some colors that I felt, sort of fit the different letters. Here is pi, by the way. Um, so I've been sort of just coloring, and then I've been looking at this, trying to remember and try to focus on these ones that aren't that obvious, because of course some of them are very similar to the Latin alphabet, but not all of them are. Um, so that's what I did. I've been, yeah, drawing and coloring them, and that sort of course, forces me to pay a bit of attention to each letter, and so now I'm doing pretty well. Another thing I did with Italian, and French and German, actually, I bought. My mother already had a Spanish dictionary, so I didn't need to buy it. But I recently bought this, so this is an Italian dictionary. The good thing about dictionaries is that they can't, run out of battery, unlike the phone. So you can be looking into them as much as you want without having to worry about that. And I've been marking different words with a pen, mainly this green pen. Green is my favorite color, so I look through it and mark words that I think are important. And sometimes I write little notes, and mark if I think the word is particularly important. Um, and sometimes I will just look in the dictionary and record myself reading different words that I want to learn, essentially. And there's some on Spotify you can search for like a thousand basic words in like Spanish or Greek or whatnot, and then you will get people essentially just mentioning different common important words in these languages. So that's one thing that I do. For instance, when I'm outside walking, um, I will put on my headphones and then I will listen to this, where they read different words, and have that on while I'm outside walking. And sometimes, um, you're obviously not going to learn 1,000 words in one go, but you might recognize some words. Some words might stand out to you, and then of course gradually you learn more and more. So yeah, I would recommend, if you're outside walking, for instance, and you can put on your headphones. That's, one way to study is to have it on sort of in the as a background noise while you're outside walking, or when you're doing something else. Like I like to sew, um, for instance, and sometimes I draw. Not a lot nowadays, but still, when you're doing something else, you can put on some recording in the background, either something you find on online with different words from a language, or you can record yourself, I guess, speaking and mentioning different words that you in particular want to learn. So that's something I've been doing, basically telling myself that these words are important, learn this in particular. Um, yeah. So I don't know if there was anything else. Oh yeah, I can mention that I have also, since I'm learning Italian, French, and Spanish at the same time, and they have a lot of words in common. I have this app called Brainscape where you can create your own flashcards, and I decided to make one category that's called Latin triplets, where I put essentially words that sound similar or are similar in all these three languages. I put them together so that um, I had this association in my head, so that if I learn a word, for instance, in Spanish, then I can learn simultaneously what it's in French and in Italian if they're similar. And so it feels like you get like three words in one sometimes. And so I try to, you know, put them together. You could, for instance, write them down on paper if you don't want to do the flashcard thing or so. But I do flashcards on my phone where I have the 3D, words together, so that my brain sort of will learn that okay, it's called this in Spanish and it's called this thing that is almost the same in French. So you know, I remember that that they're related and linked together. Um. So yeah, that's what I try to do, and I don't know. This was also a bit improvised, which you may notice, but I try to get at least some information in it. Of course, you can ask any questions in the comment section, and I think that's about all I have to say at the moment. I may have missed something, but that's life. Anyway, you can write if you have any suggestions or what you tend to do when you study languages, down below if you want to as well. That would be interesting. And goodbye. See you in the next one.